The worst baseball teams in the world. Not a list that any team wants to be a part of, but almost every team goes through this at some time or another, and for some teams it's a regular occurrence. I was planning on doing my year-end video listing every country's championship team, but I'm still gathering information on that, and we're still waiting on one league to crown a champion this month, so this is what we're doing today instead. If I had planned on doing this, I maybe could have researched why each team is so bad, but I wanted to get this one out, plus 2 other year-end videos in the following weeks, so most of the time there will be no explanation, other times only a simple one. If you can better explain why these teams had such a bad season, let us know in the comments. The video with all the world's league champions should be out next week. Be sure to check that out. It'll include the champion of the highest level of competition in dozens of countries. Today's video, though, will only include the leagues that I regularly cover on this channel. 9 winter leagues, 4 European leagues, the big 3 leagues of East Asia, and in North America, MLB and LMB. Because the winter leagues continue from one year into the next, I could either mention the worst team from last year or the team presently in last right now. I'll go with last year's final standings since they're complete, and since the winter leagues are the first to complete their seasons in the calendar year, I'll start there. In Mexico's LMP, the worst team in the 2021-22 season was Cañeros de los Mochis. Their overall record was 23-45, 17 games out of first, 6 games behind the next worst team. As you may know, the LMP plays 2 half seasons and they earn points based on their place in the standings of each half. Cañeros didn't just have a bad start or a bad finish, they were dead last in both halves of the season. In fact, this was the second year in a row they did that. They were last in both halves of the 2020-21 season as well. But 2 years ago they only won 19 games, and last year they won 23, so it was an improvement. And good news for Cañeros fans, they've seen a big improvement this season. Cañeros were 19-16 in the first half of the season, tying for 3rd place. So far they are in 2nd place in the second half at 13-7. It looks like they should have no problems making it into the playoffs, and finishing over 500 for the first time since the 2018-19 season. In the Dominican Republic's 6-team LIDOM, the worst team was Toros del Este. They were 15-25, 8 games out of first and 4 games behind the 5th place team. The other 5 teams were all very close to each other, so Toros were all alone at the bottom. This is not what they're used to. In the 2020-21 season, Toros were 16-14, 3rd in the LIDOM standings. The year before that, they were 34-16, LIDOM champions and Caribbean Series champions. So this is a team that's fallen hard in a very short time, and they're still having trouble putting themselves back together. The regular season is just about to end over there, and Toros are 2nd from the bottom with a record of 18-29. In Puerto Rico's LBPRC, RA12 was the worst team for the 2nd straight season. In fact, it was only their 2nd year of existence. This team was founded by Roberto Alomar. That's why the team is called RA12, his initials plus the number he wore as a player. In their inaugural season, RA12 was 2-16. Last season they saw some improvement, going 8-24, 12.5 out of first, 5 games behind the next worst team. There were 5 teams last season, and RA12 was the only one that did not make the playoffs. Not looking any better this season. They've got 6 teams in the LBPRC now, and they're playing a schedule of 50 games. Just over 30 games in, RA12 is 7-26, a lower win percentage than they finished with at the end of last season, and they took a 10-game losing streak into this week. So RA12 is having a hard time trying to build some success, but it's only their 3rd year. New teams often go through this. Could be a championship team in the future. Who knows? In Venezuela, the 8-team LVBP's worst team was Tiburones de la Guaira, 15-34, 17 games out of first, 5 games behind the 7th place team. The year before that, they had the 2nd worst record at 16-24. But if you go back to the 2019-2020 season, they were 25-17, 1st in the regular season standings, but lost in the semifinals of the playoffs. And this team has had a lot of success historically. 3 league titles in the 1960s, 1 in the 70s, 3 more times in the 80s. But their last title came in the 1985-86 season, 37 years ago. However, this could be the year they end that title drought. They are 24-19, just 3 games out of first. Their hitting has gotten a boost from the arrival of a hitter named Ronald Acuna Jr. He joined the team a few weeks ago. In Colombia's LPB, the worst out of the 4 teams there last season was Tigres de Cartagena. They were awful, 8-28, 15 games out of first, 11 games behind the 3rd place team. That was a huge fall from the 2020-21 season, when they finished in 1st place with a record of 16-8. But that season was an exception. Tigres have finished last in 4 of the last 6 seasons. Not bad this season though, a record of 14-11, only 2 games behind the league leader, and well ahead of the last place team. Looks like they'll be in the playoffs this season, aiming for their first league title since the 2013-14 season. Panama's LBPP, better known as PROBEIS, only had 3 teams participate last season, but it might as well have only been 2. Águilas Metropolitanas were 4-17, 12 games behind the first place team, 8 games behind the second place team. This came after a canceled 2020-21 season in Panama. And the league changes teams often. Teams will often sit out a season. Hard to see if there's a pattern there with losing teams. The 2022-23 season in Panama just got started last Friday, with Águilas losing all 3 of their games on opening weekend. In Nicaragua's 5-team LBPN, Indios del Bor suffered a record of 14-26 to finish last for the second year in a row, 12 games out of first, but only 1 game behind the fourth place team. Though this was their second consecutive last place finish, it was an improvement over the previous year. And this is not a team with a losing history. They are 8-time league champions, the most in LBPN history. Their last one came in the 2014-15 season. And it looks like they're turning things around. This season they have 10 wins and 10 losses, just 1.5 out of the top spot. Should be a postseason team this year. The Cuban National Series had an unusual schedule this year, played from midwinter to early summer, so really more of a spring league. Out of the 16 teams in Cuba, Cienfuegos was the worst. At 21-52, they were 23 games out of first, trailing the next worst team by 5 games. The year before, they were tied for 6th with a record of 42-33. One reason for that sudden drop was the loss of Cesar Prieto. He was the batting champion of the Cuban National Series the year before, hitting over 400. Then he defected, so his loss was felt. But it's hard to imagine the loss of one player having such a huge impact, especially in a league where players just represent the regions they come from. Right now, the Cuban Elite Series is being played, and the start of the next Cuban National Series is uncertain. Now to the European leagues. In the 9-team Honkbal Hoofdklasse of the Netherlands, the Silicon Storks carry the unwanted title of league's worst team. At 2 wins, 22 losses, they were 19 games out of first, 4.5 behind the next to last team. Storks and a few other teams in the Hoofdklasse have been down for many years now. The league has been a 2-team race year after year for a while. Finally, last season it became a 3-team race, and there was a new Holland Series champion. But for Silicon Storks and the rest of the bottom 4, nothing has changed. In Germany's baseball Bundesliga, there was a familiar face in the cellar. The Ulm Falcons were 4-24, 18 games out of first place in the South Division. And this was actually their best season in years. They were 0-28 in 2021, 0-14 in 2020. So a 4-win season was a triumph for this club. It was their best season since 2019, when they went 5-23. And they were very close to escaping the cellar. Because of the lopsided standings in the South, they finished only 2 games behind 2 other teams. In Czech baseball Extraliga, 2 teams from the city of Brno faced off in the Czech series, and another team from Brno was all alone in the basement. Technica Brno won only 2 games all season, while losing 19. The next worst team was 8-13, so they were by far the worst. 16 games out of first in a 21-game schedule. The top 6 reached the round-robin postseason, while Technica had to avoid relegation. Technica was one of Extraliga's best teams in the 90s and early 2000s. But in recent years, they've bounced back and forth between the top league and the second league, always at or near the bottom when playing in the top league. The Italian Baseball League is a little different from the other European leagues. The last 2 years, they've been playing the first phase of the regular season with over 30 teams, instead of under 10 like they'd previously done. That produces some really lopsided results. I don't even count that part of the season. The real season begins when the top 8 teams move on to the second phase, split into 2 4-team groups. The worst team in that phase was Godo Knights, a team that's been in the league for a long time, but has never won anything. They were 5-25 in Group B, 21 games behind the group leader. The closest team was 6 games ahead of them. Back to North America, 16 teams in Mexico's Summer League, the LMB. The worst of them all was Bravos de Leon. At 29 wins and 61 losses, they finished 24 games behind the first-place team in the South Division, but only a game and a half away from escaping the cellar. Losing is nothing new to them. In 2021, they were 29-37, finishing in 7th place and missing the playoffs. The team's been around since 1978, won their only Serie del Rey title in 1990. From 1992 to 2016, the team didn't exist. Since their return, they've had a hard time building a consistent winner. Major League Baseball, the worst team overall was the Washington Nationals. 55 wins, 107 losses, 46 games behind the NL East champion, 14 games behind the next worst team in their own division. It was the first time since 2009 they finished with MLB's worst record, and came just 3 years after winning the World Series. But so many of the players from that championship team have left. In 2021, they were 65-97. Then in 2022, they suffered a 9-game losing streak. Star players Juan Soto and Josh Bell left during the season, and a bad team got even worse. This is a team that's starting over. Things should be looking up from here, but it'll take a while to build this team into a contender again. The American League's worst team was the Oakland A's, 60 wins, 102 losses. Unlike the Nationals, this was a team coming off a good season. They were 10 games over 500 in 2021. Then, before the season started, players like Matt Olson, Matt Chapman, and Chris Bassett left the team, and they were nothing like the team that won 86 games the year before. Right now, their future's not looking too bright. Could be the worst team overall in MLB in 2023. In Japan's 12-team NPB, the worst overall was the Hokkaido Nippon Ham Fighters. 59 wins, 81 losses, and 3 ties. 16.5 games behind the league leader, and 9 games behind the next team. They were the only team in the 6-team Pacific League that just wasn't competitive at all. The team that Shohei Ohtani and Yu Darvish used to play for, their last postseason appearance was in 2018. After that, they finished second from the bottom 3 years in a row. In 2021, they missed the cellar by 1 game. So their last place finish this year was not a surprise. Their pitching wasn't too bad, but still one of the worst in Pacific League. They were the lowest scoring team in the league, and earlier this week one of their best hitters left the team. They got an entertaining new manager last season, and they move into a brand new stadium next year, but it looks like the losing will continue, at least for another year. The worst team in NPB's Central League was the Chunichi Dragons. 66 wins, 75 losses, and 2 ties. 15 games out of first, but only a half game away from escaping the cellar. Actually, they won 10 more games than they did the previous year, though they finished 1 place lower. They were 5th place out of 6 teams in 3 out of 4 seasons, from 2018 to 2021. They had Central League's second lowest team ERA last season, but were by far the lowest scoring team. This is a regular occurrence for the Dragons. They play in a pitcher's park, so they like to stock up on good pitching and win lots of low-scoring games. And they do well at home, but the lack of hitting, especially power hitting, keeps them from being competitive, and they never learn their lesson. This offseason, they've already traded away one of their best hitters. In the 10-team KBO of Korea, the Hanwha Eagles finished with the worst record for the 3rd straight season. 43 games out of first, 14 games behind the 9th place team. They were 46, 96, and 2, down a little from their 2021 record of 49, 83, and 12, and about the same as their 2020 record of 46, 95, and 3. Not only have they finished last in the past 3 seasons, but have also suffered double-digit losing streaks for 3 consecutive years, the first KBO team to ever do that. The last time they did not finish last was in 2019 when they were 58 and 86, second worst in the league. Then if you go back to 2018, they were a playoff team. This is the team that Hyunjin Ryu played for in his KBO days. I don't know what caused the Eagles to suddenly go from a playoff team to a perennial doormat, but looking at their stats from last season, there is nothing to be positive about. They scored the least and allowed the most, and it wasn't even close in either category. Fewest home runs, lowest team batting, highest starting pitcher ERA, second highest relief pitcher ERA. They have made some off-season acquisitions that should make this team a little better, so maybe they can get past the 50-win mark next year, but another last-place finish looks very likely. In the 5-team CPBL of Taiwan, the Fubon Guardians were 46, 70, and 4 for the season, with the worst overall record, 24 games behind the top team, but just a game and a half behind the 4th-place team. The CPBL season is divided into 2 halves, so we can easily see where the problem was. In the first half, they were just awful, 16, 43, and 1. Second half, though, they were pretty good, 30, 27, and 3, only 6.5 out of first, so they did have something to cheer about. It was their 3rd straight losing season, and they also had the worst overall record in 2020. Their last playoff appearance was in 2018. They don't so much have a reputation for losing, they just have a lot of bad luck, even though they often put a competitive team on the field. And judging by their second half performance last summer, they might have another competitive team in 2023. Last, I want to mention the Australian Baseball League. The ABL canceled its 2021-22 season, so there was no last-place team from earlier this year. For this one, I'll have to make an exception and mention the team that's currently the worst. That title belongs to the Sydney Blue Sox, who are 4-15. That could change by the end of this weekend, though. Another team, Geelong Korea, is 5-15 at this time. Both teams are used to losing. Sydney almost always finishes in the bottom half of the standings. This is only the 3rd season for Geelong. They were dead last in each of their first 2 seasons. Sydney's roster looked unimpressive going into this season. Geelong is an all-Korean team, using mostly KBO prospects, which doesn't seem to work out too well, though they look a little better this season. And that's it, all the worst baseball teams in the world in 2022. If you've got anything to add, leave a comment down below. That's all for this one, and until next time, this is Baseball International. See ya.